Welcome to the No Regrets Leadership Podcast, where leaders are empowered to equip and disciple men.
Welcome to the No Regrets Podcast. My name is Nate Gruber, and I am the Director of Ministries for No Regrets. Today, we have an awesome guest. Russ Ewell is on the podcast. Russ joins us from California. He is a pastor and a leader out in the Bay Area, and he's been working with men and women out there, but he's been doing some great things with Gen Z. In fact, we're going to be highlighting one of his articles in our No Regrets newsletter this month that talks about ministering to Gen Z. And so we're so excited to have him on the podcast today. So Russ, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, Nate, and I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, we came across the article that you wrote on Gen Z and just found it really profound. And then as I started to dig into a little bit more of what you do in your church context, I started thinking, okay, this is a guy who actually practices what he preaches. And so it's pretty cool to actually meet somebody who is empowering Gen Z. But why don't you just give us a quick snapshot of who you are, where you lead, and what drives you as a leader of leaders in your context?
Well, again, thanks for having me on, and I'm excited. Anytime people are focused on developing men, spiritual men in leadership, I believe that changes not just the lives of men, but changes the world we live in. So that I'm excited about the podcast. I grew up in Grand Rapids, outside of there in a little suburb, and I was an agnostic kid that didn't go to church in a very church-oriented town. I used to play my friends, one of my best friends, dad owned a bunch of property in his house right across the street almost from Zondervan. And,
oh, really?
Yeah. So I was used to that. I was around church all the time. A ton of my friends were in Young Life, all that. And I said, no, 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 and no every time. And my dad would go, do you want to go to church? I say no. And right in my senior year, one of my best friends, Jeff Shipman, he came up to me and he said, hey, will you go to Young Life with me? And I go, no, why would I do that? And he goes, they're giving away $20 tonight to whoever brings a visitor. And if you get your hat, put your name in the hat. And I go, $20. And I'm thinking I'm going to get the $20. So I go, okay, I'll go. I remember it was a Wednesday night. I went on in and nobody else had a visitor except him. And so he won the 20 and he was going to take it all. And right there, I said, hey, hang on a minute, man, I get 50% of that. But what I remember about that, and I thank him for, that was my first exposure to an environment where there were people that I knew that I liked, and they were being religious or spiritual. It was a year later in college in Boston that I became a Christian. The reason all that's important is because that shapes the way I do ministry. I came out of Boston. I live in Silicon Valley now and lead the Bay Area Christian Church as executive minister, but we have 9 campuses. And so during the pandemic, we put in place 2 lead ministers and their wives to lead the East Bay and the West Bay. For those unfamiliar, think Oakland is East Bay, San Jose, San Francisco is West Bay. And so they run all of that. And then my job and my wife's job is to work with them. And we're already in a succession plan and executing that. But along the way, as a parent of millennials and Gen Z, that's a humbling experience. I never know I call it being on a roller coaster because of their lives. But that made me pay attention to younger people because as a parent, but also I believe that the church dies unless you inspire the people that are coming generations later to be a part of the church. And so a big part of our philosophy is 1, make God known, 2, do good. And in that approach, make sure that we give people that are younger an opportunity to shape the church and to shape how the church works, not just have them come into the culture we want to create. Now, our culture is always going to be biblical and it's always going to be God-oriented. But as you know, there's a lot of flexibility in that. And you're an athlete, so you know that if you can't adapt when you're out there in the field, you're going to lose to some teams. And so we kind of have been working on adapting, and it's been exciting and challenging at the same time. But that's sort of a snapshot.
That's so interesting. Remind me the name of your church again, just because I think our listeners might want to know too.
Yeah, Bay Area Christian Church.
Bay Area Christian.
And I'm in Silicon Valley. I'm in the campus in Silicon Valley. I've been in Silicon Valley for 30 plus years.
How long have you guys been running as a church?
Well, it was a tiny little back in the 1937 or 38.
Okay.
It was just a little church out in Berkeley, and that was obviously I wasn't around. But we didn't really expand until in the recent times in the last 30 years.
Well, I asked that because I think there's a lot of churches, and I mean, I grew up at a mega church that had a ton of growth, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, but it's gone through all kinds of phases, right? It's kind of been up and down as far as attendance and all that kind of stuff. But I think there's tons of churches that are really grappling, with a congregation that is a lot of Gen X, and it's a lot of boomers.
Yeah.
It's a lot of gray hairs in the congregation. I was working for many years in a Methodist church, and it seemed like a constant perennial question, almost like we were treating young people as a category,
Yeah.
to be had. It's like, how do we
Yeah.
get more of these people in our congregation?
Yeah.
And the feeling that I get is that we were kind of missing the point. We were not understanding the world that these young folks are coming from. And so you guys have seemed to start to set into place young people. I'm talking Gen Z and millennials who are actually in places of authority in the church and in positions of authority. And that's awesome. So can you just tell us, how did you come to a place where you could start understanding Gen Z? Like, what's the world that they grew up in? And then what's it been like to actually have some of them on your staff and in leadership?
Yeah, your questions are fantastic. And so
Yeah.
first I'll say, when I put in context what you're saying, I moved here in 1993.
Yeah.
And so what we've seen is exactly what you said. And that is that we saw a lot of baby boomers and
Mhm.
Gen X become Christians and grow.
Mhm.
And I saw, and I think a lot of my approach comes out of personal experience, meaning my relationship with God. I saw that as a leader, if I don't constantly have new people in my life that think differently, I have strong opinions and a strong will, been that way since I was a little kid, then
Mm.
I'm going to end up just wanting to dominate everything. Now, my wife, fortunately, is very strong-willed, so it all balances out. But I started figuring out, I started going, oh, I've got to constantly keep new people around me that think different than me. And
Wow.
that was one of the things that happened. But then the other thing happened is my oldest son, trying to help him become a Christian, and he's a millennial. And so all the kids around him, none of them really were that into becoming a Christian. So I started a little group called Double Edge for these young
Mm.
guys. And it was about 7 of them. And I was like, okay, I'm going to help these guys become Christians. They all did become Christians, fortunately.
Wow.
And that I did that because I wanted my son's friends. I knew if he wouldn't become a Christian, if they didn't become a Christian. So once I saw that
Wow.
and I saw the work it did, I played basketball. So I
Yeah.
ended up hurting my ligament in my ankle. We had a basketball league. I coached in it, but it was an adult league. I decided because I hurt, I said, let me coach the teenagers because then maybe I can inspire some of these teenagers to be spiritual and have faith. And
Yeah.
I went to the first practice, like, oh, these guys are terrible. This is going to go badly. And we're in an adult league. We're just going to get killed. And so I started working on them and teaching what my coach taught me, which my coach was a very disciplined guy. And he was like, okay, let's go run this play. And I sat the bench because I wouldn't run the play a lot. And so he'd be like, yeah, I'd freelance. But we won all kinds of games. And so I learned from that. Anyway, I taught that to the teenagers and they bucked and they were like, we don't like this. Well, we ended up
Yeah.
winning the adult league championship.
No way.
And I sat down and I told my wife, said, I just learned that I get more excitement out of watching other people succeed than I get out of feeling successful myself. And I said, I've never felt it like I just felt it. And that
Mm.
began me turning and saying, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. The way to battle my own pride or my own desire to be the man or whatever you want to say about it is to
Right.
constantly invest in other people. And then I just drew from my sports experiences. And so that got me going. Now, recently, during the pandemic specifically, the percentage of kids with high levels of anxiety, the ADHD that's
Mm.
come up, the depression that's out there, and I do think this is related to many, many things, but I do think we're living in an algorithmic social
Yeah.
media environment where unfortunately, and I'm big on technology, so I'm not like a negative person on technology, but unfortunately, a lot of these companies make money off advertising. And so when you do that, you're not necessarily motivated to putting Sesame Street on for people or anything. They're putting whatever makes money. And so
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
damaged a lot of kids and it's distorted their view of truth. It's distorted their view of what's really healthy. I mean, there was an article I read a while ago that said that professionals who actually know about ADHD need to be making
Yeah.
more podcasts and more content because a lot of kids are just getting on there who have their own experience and telling other kids what to do, and it's not good for them to do. So seeing all those statistics made me say, well, in my church, whatever that percentage is, 42% anxiety, I've got 42% that way. So we started approaching by saying, we've got to
Mm.
and this is hard for me, we got to simplify our sermons.
Yeah.
And we've got to get more young people up there speaking and talking, because no matter how good a sermon is, if the kid or the adult can't feel like they can ever relate, because in my case, I'm talking about Bruce Springsteen,
Right,
and
right.
they're thinking about a whole nother set of artists, and you have to bridge that gap. And I've had to learn a lot about that. But anyway,
Yeah.
I think that my family, but also seeing all the young people, what they go through, and seeing their potential, which I can talk about later.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, you outlined so many things there. I mean, there's so much as far as what I guess just the cultural water that they're born into, right? You talk about screens, you talk about depression, anxiety. I kind of live, so I'm 38. I'm a millennial, but I've related so much as a kid to so many boomers and Gen X. And so I kind of know how to deal with everybody, how to work with everybody.
Yeah.
I fit really well with people in their 60s and 70s. I also can relate really well to people who are even in their teens and 20s. I was a youth pastor for a while.
Yeah.
I've seen that so often, what you're describing, which is this disconnect. I've heard so many of my friends who are boomers in their 60s and 70s right now kind of look at Gen Z and be like, well, we never had anxiety and depression. Just move on, just work harder, just work through it, this kind of an attitude. And it's pretty amazing to me because I think most churches, the priority is that 45-minute sermon on Sunday.
Yeah.
And to hear somebody like you saying, we started recognizing that we need to simplify these, maybe make them a little bit shorter, and then just give voice to the whole array of people that are here on a
Yeah.
Sunday morning. That's pretty awesome.
100%. And it's been hard for me. So give you a couple examples of this.
Yeah.
One, me getting my sermons down, it's still a constant challenge for me. Let me
Yeah.
put it that way.
How long
But
do you try to get them down to? How many
so
minutes?
I try, I mean, I'm terrible, but I try to hit 30 minutes
Yeah.
max.
Yeah.
And sometimes I can hit 20,
Yeah.
sometimes I go 40. There
Yeah.
are rare occasions where I go to the 45 amount. But here's the thing, I don't preach every week.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like the last 2 weeks, two millennial couples spoke. And when they speak, because they're a little newer, they definitely stay tight in that window. When I speak, I use polling. So we actually have the audience use a
Interesting.
QR code, and then I go through it, and then I'll ask questions, and then we all watch live in real time as their answers show up relative to the message that I'm giving. So,
Wow.
and I teach a lot about anxiety, not just the
Mhm.
Bible scriptures on that, which are obviously the truth, but I also teach the statistics and the trends. I've done messages on social media, not that social media in and of itself is evil, but what is it doing to you, and being
Yeah.
aware. And I bring a lot of secular studies in, and these have to be simplified. We use video. And again, we have people share. So I might talk, but then I bring somebody up who's younger, a teenager or a college student, a young lady or a young man, and they share their own personal life and what they've been through. So we try to mix it up. Our services generally, when we were with adults, it could be a 2-hour service or whatever, all told. It's extremely rare for us to go over an hour in our total service. And we have at least a 5-minute or so break in there just so people can fellowship and talk to each other and all that. So we try to do a lot of creative,
Wow.
like this week, we have an inclusive, because I have two special needs kids. And so we have an inclusive trunk or treat at all of our campuses. And when we do that, we have that right at our church. If people can come, you don't have to go to church. You can just come to because that's doing good. But that service will be even shorter, and it'll have all kinds of different things that go on. Just for those who would be concerned, oh, are you watering down the Bible? No, we don't.
Yeah.
Not at all. If you look at anything I've written, you'll know that's not going on. But we simplify it, because the bottom line is, when you're dealing with kids who have anxiety, attention challenges, emotional dysregulation challenges, you're dealing with just kids who are used to seeing in 2 minutes information, not in 20 minutes. You have to reach them where they are. What I've seen is reach them where they are, and over time they grow to be able to consume and handle more, sort of that milk to solid food thing.
That's really, really good. I mean, I'm on board. I went to Fuller Seminary in their youth institute and all that kind of stuff. And so you're preaching to the choir here, but I know that there's guys out there who are in, strong Bible-based teaching. You might have a 50-minute sermon on some weeks, and you already hit it, right? You're saying, well, isn't that kind of watering down the gospel. And I love it because I've read your stuff. And so I know that where you're coming from, it's really clear that that's not what's happening.
Yeah.
But so I guess just speak to that for a moment. If you're speaking to the guys who are worried about, okay, I don't want to dumb down the message. I don't want to play to the lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
Just speak to them. Like if they want to minister to those guys who are currently in their 20s, 30s, but they're afraid of doing that, what would you say to those guys?
Well, let me use my man Bruce Springsteen as an example. When I was in college, people were like, you got to go to a concert. We're going. Why don't you come to a concert? And I was like, I'm not interested. I don't even know who this guy is. Over time, I understood and I learned. I began to study him. And I actually went through this thing where I wanted to study all the great bands, James Brown, the Beatles, all the great bands. But I really locked into him because of the way he built his band. The reason I'm mentioning this for those guys, for guys that are out there, most of them at least are familiar with him. Maybe you're a fan. When you see his concerts from the 80s, 90s, there's a crowd there. But then if you look at his concerts today, there's that same crowd. They're older, but they have their kids there. And
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
Bruce, and I even think his movie coming out is his recognition of he wants to communicate to generations beyond himself, beyond his, about who he is and what his message is. I think that's what he's doing. I
yeah.
think as we as ministers, and there's a lot of people who do that in all walks of life, we have to figure out, okay, this gospel doesn't belong to us. Our job is to make sure it's heard by everyone. I've studied Billy Graham, and I've asked myself the question, how could this phenomenal guy who got the gospel out to so many people, how did he do it? And then how does that translate to today? And so we
Wow.
got to constantly do that. Now, people say, what about depth? Well, it only matters what people hear. I was trained, and a guy told me once, he goes, Russ, it doesn't matter what you say, it only matters what people hear. So if no one's listening to the 50-minute sermon after 3 minutes, then it doesn't matter how good it is because no one's listening to it. And
Yeah.
so the key is to build people's ability to use it. I started doing yoga some years ago. And, because I needed strengthening of ligaments and all that. And some
Sure.
guys were like, yoga, what are you doing? Well, when I first started doing this, this is hard, much harder than I thought. So I started with 5 minutes and just doing 5-minute little routines to get myself to the point where I could do more. I think that's what we're doing with our Gen Z people. It's like, okay, can I get this person to understand Jesus? Okay, maybe all they can understand about Jesus is his interaction with the man at the well. Do you want to get well? And maybe they can
Yeah.
understand that. And if I can get that in a 25 minutes and I can make 2 points or 3 points out of that, and they walk away and remember something, a story, a scripture, and then they want to come back. That's the goal. That's throwing out the net. And I think it's hard when you're older. I know this for myself. I'm a big time Bible guy. I come from a
Yeah.
background of being in context, no proof texting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I've got kids, they come from that whole background, New American Standard, and I still in that way, but I'll use the ERV now. Sometimes this may sound like, I've left God. I use the Message. I'll use the Passion. I'll use whatever I can
Yeah.
use to get the kids to understand, not kids, I shouldn't say that, to get the younger people to understand God. I have seen it
Right.
over and over again. I don't use it a lot, but I'll use the ERV. And then all of a sudden, 2 or 3 years later, these kids, when I use the NASB, they're going, I understand that because they're now
Yeah.
hooked on the language of scripture, the spiritual language. It takes work. People say, well, why do you do this? Because ultimately, I know that I'm going to be gone and all the people in my generation are going to be gone. And
Yeah.
I think every day in my life about what's it going to be like when I'm gone. Will there be anything left? Churches over the centuries have died as soon as the generations that built that church pass away. And I think
Right.
we should try. I mean, I was just reading Job today, and it talked about in the second half of his life, he ended up seeing 4 generations of his children. And I think our churches are spiritual family. And the people in it are all our children and our brothers and our sisters. And we should go, let me get that generation going forward. And a big part of that's leadership too, but I can talk about that later. But that's
Yeah.
how I approach it. I think about it. And I had to overcome it, Nate. I had to overcome, people had to challenge me. You got to understand that you're not betraying God when you don't do the kind of sermons you've done before. And I have
Yeah.
young guys, your age and younger, like between 25, well, actually, they weren't that. They were more like 22 and 28. I began to let them help me figure out how to construct the sermon for
Wow.
their age group. I allowed them to edit slides. I remember I had this incredible, well, I thought it was incredible. It might not have been. I had this incredible message on Joseph's life.
Yeah.
And they were like, that's way too many scriptures. And so they created a slide for me that condensed about 50 to 60% of the scriptures on one slide and just referenced it. And I remember going, I feel like I'm betraying. This is wrong. We've got to go through the actual script. They've got to hear them read. And so I had to and that was about 10 years ago. And so I've evolved.
Are you looking for a Bible study that will forge a deep and lasting connection with other guys? Then the Basecamp Bible Study Series is for you. Basecamp is a series of studies that will guide your men through the scriptures, addressing core disciplines of the Christian faith, while challenging them to become authentic and committed followers of Jesus. Each lesson includes a digital study guide, teaching videos, and leader notes to help facilitate transformative discussions. Start your spiritual journey today with Basecamp. Visit noregretsmen.org/Basecamp. Again, that's noregretsmen.org/Basecamp.
Wow. About a dozen things that I could respond to there, because you go so deep on so many things. But I'll say, as I've been reading your book recently, there's actually been a lot of moments, because I'm the same way as you. I'm deep into scripture ever since I was a little kid. My dad brought me up. The guy who started Elmbrook Church, Stuart Briscoe, many, many years ago. He's since now passed, but he is just a deep, 50-minute sermons were normal, and he'd go overtime all the time, and it's just so deep into scripture. And so that's kind of my heartbeat. But what I've recognized is that I'm a weird millennial. I'm not like I'm not like the normal. So as I was reading your book, and as I've been reading your book, there's been a lot of times where, for me, it's great. But there's a lot of times I stop myself, I go, there's a lot of scripture in here. It's like every page I'm turning and you're quoting scripture left and right. And so I love that. And I think a lot of our listeners, they're right in the same ballpark as that, right? They love scripture. They love leading men's groups. They love doing this. And so to hear that actually you have to translate, transform, be flexible, because you said one thing, you said it only matters what people hear. I wrote that down because oh my gosh, how many sermons have I preached where I thought this stuff is so good, minute 37 as I continue going on about this is so good. And the reality is, who's still listening, So man, so many great things there. Now you were alluding to the fact that you've put some younger people in leadership. There's a lot of churches that I know of where they are struggling. Some of them actually a lot of them that I've seen now recently, it's like they have a boomer pastor who's in his mid-60s and he's looking to retire. I'm thinking the church even a mile down the road here, they're in the exact same situation, mid-60s, and all of a sudden they have not been building a culture of younger people leading in the church. And so now it's time to hand off the church to the next generation. And it's almost like, what do we do? Now, it sounds like you've been more proactive. I'm sure a lot of the guys would love to hear just how you went about being proactive about putting young people into leadership in your church.
Yeah, so let me just say for all the guys out there, I don't think we have all the answers and we haven't figured it all out. And everything I'm talking about, I can list out mistakes and failures that we've had and continue to have. I'm not coming from that position. And I know a lot of guys are working really hard out there and doing a lot of things, and they're trying to do everything. And I just want to acknowledge that. I think we're all trying to learn it together. That's why I'm excited. Even just hearing you respond, it's very encouraging to hear you talk, because I'd probably say you're less an unusual millennial as much as one that God has chosen and raised up. I think he's going to always raise up people to make sure that scripture, to make sure that ministry stays alive. So let me speak to the leadership thing, and I'll tie that in.
Yeah.
One of my favorite relationships in the Bible is Moses and Joshua. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, not a lot of times, but sometimes in churches, it's always like, well, who's the kid? Who's the minister's kid, and will he take over? But that's not a pattern you really see in the Bible unless you're going to go with the kings. And that doesn't turn out too great most of the time. But the Moses-Joshua relationship is God raising up a guy specifically that he felt could take Moses' spot. In my view, I don't think in terms of one guy. And so I recognized a long time ago that I naturally like leading. So I said, I've got to find something else to do so that when the people come along who want to take over and run it, I can move aside happily instead of
Mm,
resist it. So that
yeah.
got me thinking, what will I do? I was always into technology, and that's part of why we built our digital ministry. That's become the place that I moved to. So I can
Hmm.
get out of the way. I also was constantly asking the question, I did it publicly. Whenever I'd speak, I go, who's gonna take my place? I can't do this forever. And so
Yeah.
that became a culture. And I started also saying, we need young people. And my wife was doing the same thing because we have a strong women's ministry and women leaders are developed in their own track. We're obviously all together. So
Yeah.
what we do, some simple stuff we do is we hire, this past summer, we hired what's called 40 scholars and interns. So scholars are kids that are in college that we give money to, a stipend, so that
Hmm.
they can just have an easier time maybe paying for books, paying for school, but they come into a little training program we have, it's not really little, where they really get trained about being a leader. They don't have to go into the ministry. We are
Sure.
happy if they turn out to be a great small group leader. Then we have interns who maybe are a little bit more on a ministry track. Also, thirdly, we don't have just ministry people. So me, I'm what we call a hybrid, but if I bivocational guy, in that I've always done technology work. I build a company and we do technology work. And then I do the ministry because we believe we want our ministry people to be connected to the world in the day to day, grind of life, not just off, on their own, living in a world that a lot of people don't live in. And so
Yeah.
there's three things that happen. We'll catch you senior in high school if they're ready, but college students can be scholars or interns. We hire, like I said, we had 40 this past summer, but we keep on a certain number. I think right now we may have 15 that are on all year long. Now,
Sure.
these kids go, we had one guy, he ended up learning to code because he worked on our digital team, and then he ended up working for one of the big companies here for a long time. Guess what? This past year, he decided I'm going to leave that company, and he's doing really well,
Wow.
extremely well. And I'm going to
Wow.
come back with my wife, and we want to become campus leaders. So they
Wow.
just became campus leaders. That's a millennial. We've got
Wow.
our aim is 50% millennials in another 3 to 4 years that lead
Yeah.
our campuses. We're about 35% of the way there already. And
Hmm.
so our plan is, how do we get more people involved in leadership decisions? They make decisions about music. They make decisions about for instance, our teen camps. They create that now. So they
Wow.
speak, they teach the whole digital stuff, everything, the deep spirituality site we have, even the
Hmm.
book that was written with my team here. They're all millennials. I'm their dad in a way. You know what I mean?
Grandpa.
Not
Yeah.
not real, yeah, grandpa. Not really. They would be like, no, please. But
Yeah.
the thing I think is important if someone's listening out there, how do you do it? It can be done fairly quickly. It's about letting go. And I'm
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
control guy. And so it's about letting
Yeah.
go. And it's scary to let go. It's also about looking beyond your own family and seeing the
Yeah.
church as God's church, and you looking and saying, well, who is God raising up? And that's when it comes back to someone like you, is I see someone like you and I'm like, oh, that's the guy who's going to take the place in our church of my creativity. That's what I'd be doing. I'd be looking at you going, and I see someone like you, and I do this. I'd be like, okay, it's time for me to move aside. So I had a guy, his name's Nick.
Hmm.
You and he are very similar, and he
Yeah.
worked
Yeah.
for EA Sports. That's
Oh,
where his
cool.
background came from. He and I started out. He was an intern, and he'd just go work out with me all the time.
Hmm.
And he's been with me the whole time. And he came up next to me and was running with me. And I said, well, it's time for you to leave now and have your own group. And so
Yeah.
he, a year and a half ago, took over the group I built actually originally.
Hmm.
And he took that over, the one where he became a Christian originally. And he's
Yeah.
exactly your age and all that. And
Hmm.
so I just love that. I'm always going to have to fight my ego and my pride and my desire to feel relevant. And so I'm trying every day of my life to get relevance out of seeing what God does in other people's lives. And so it's a struggle. And I want to encourage everybody out there. I'll tell you what, if you get a lot of Nate Grubers around you, you're going to be a lot happier person. That's my experience. You'll be a happier, and your kids will do better and your marriage will do better.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, yeah, we don't know each other well, but I do appreciate you just sensing some of that stuff. The picture you're painting, I think for some guys is like it doesn't sound easy. It doesn't sound quick, but the key, like you said, it's about letting go.
Yeah.
And it's the same model that we're proponents of for groups, because we're all about small groups and multiplying small groups.
Yeah.
I've seen, as a discipleship pastor at churches in the past, I've seen so many groups that stay together for 20, 30 years, and they're never multiplying. They're never thinking outside of their group. And Jesus's message was to go. It's like Jesus had like a couple years with these guys, and then he sent them out to go. It's like these guys were not ready.
That's right.
I loved, you said earlier, the gospel doesn't belong to us. I've never heard anybody say that, but it makes all the sense in the world. It belongs to everybody.
Yeah.
It's not our gospel. It's not about us. So this idea of letting go, I think is such a good word. So I really appreciate that. There's so much we could get into and say. I would honestly love to dig into more about how you guys run the inner workings of your church. But what I do want to touch on, because you already have touched on it here, is that you've started to go, and you have gone towards digital resources. And so you have a resource called Deep Spirituality. In fact, it's deepspirituality.com. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And I've been digging into that, and it's really great articles, great stuff. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, and then just about what you see for your future and pouring into guys and really just, developing people through that. Why don't you go into
It's really interesting you asked.
Yeah.
First of all, I built, before it became like it is now, I basically built it for the campus I was leading at the time, which it happened to be the biggest one we had, and it was all in, it's in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I don't feel like, and I study a lot of different people, a lot of professors and teachers, and I'm constantly trying to figure out how do people learn, how do they process things, and that includes, great Bible teachers. I'm always constantly trying to look at that. One of my favorites, J. Oswald Sanders, try to look at those guys and go, well, how do I translate what they did to our time? And so I thought people need things to walk away from a sermon, and then they can go, I can go study some stuff on my own. So I basically created this basic WordPress site, and I put all my stuff in there. And then I would say, hey, if you want to learn more, you can go read about this.
Yeah.
People liked it, and they were into it, right? And so I said, oh, okay, I see. Let me see if I can build this more. And then when talking with everybody here, we said, oh, that sounds like what you've been trying to do for a long time. And you've got all this technology skill and connections, so utilize it. And then out of that, I went, well, if I build this out, I don't want it to be for people who just go to church. I want it to be for people like me who didn't have a positive impression of church, because all I saw was a bunch of people that went to a church and were religious, and I didn't want to do that. I didn't see any God. I'm not blaming the churches. It's me.
Yeah.
I only saw the people. And so I just happened to pick up this little book when I was a little kid that was written by some priest. I think my parents must have bought it or left it. I read everything. So my mom would get me Shakespeare comic books. I was a total nerd. But anyway, I read it, and it just was a 8-page thing, a little small thing about God's love. And I was like, I didn't even know that. Well, later on, it bore fruit. And so I wanted to create things that people can go look at that don't go to church, that believe in God, that are dealing with just basic things in life. And I wanted to have it be spiritual, because spirituality is something I think people can feel comfortable going, I want to be spiritual. I don't know if I want to be a churchgoer.
Right.
That's everything's built around that. And recently I launched the Chemistry Lab, which is my newsletter, to be able to mesh what I consider fairly deep biblical thought with deep secular thought, because chemistry was what I wanted to do originally. Chemistry, then politics, but that's a long story. But anyway, it's for, if you're out there, it's for people that maybe, it's like a little bit like the book I wrote. It's for people that maybe are like, I'm a little disillusioned. I don't trust it. I'm not sure. I don't know anything about it. And they can dive in and they can get that. And it's also for just your basic everyday Christian who's trying to live a life of discipleship and faith. And it's really geared toward relationship with God. We try anyway.
Yeah. And I think that it's so great because again, I think it highlights the divide between, there's a lot of people out there who they grew up with church is safe, they trust it, and the structure has worked for them.
Yeah.
And now, so then they a lot of times try to present the structure to the world and say, hey, isn't it great? And I think what you're tapping into, and I think what a lot of Gen Z, a lot of what younger folks out there, there's not that assumption that, hey, the church is great.
Yeah.
There's a lot of skepticism. There's a lot of people who aren't sure or who have been legitimately hurt by people in the church.
Yeah.
And so that's what I love. And I come from the same vantage point of how do I translate this good news, which you said it's not about me, it's about Jesus. How do I translate that into a way that makes sense to other people in the world today? And so that's what I've been loving about that resource. And I guess my last word on it that I would say to any leaders out there is just to say that who you are comes through more than anything else when you're leading young people, especially. They can sniff out somebody who's not authentic before you even speak a word. Sometimes they can just look. They can just look at you and go, "Yeah, I don't want to be like that guy."
Yeah.
And so that's why the onus is on us. I think is to put in practices every single day. Actually, come to know Jesus every day, because people will want to be like that.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I also think guys should understand that all the you said you went to Fuller Seminary, Fuller's Theological, and so all the training they've had and all this rich Bible study they've done, don't deprive this young generation of all that. Get great skill, great wisdom. And I think I'll say this, I'm a very positive person about millennials, Gen Z,
totally.
I guess Alpha's coming next. I'm very positive. I think it's a group that doesn't like dominance. It likes more teamwork. It has great potential for being very relational. And I actually think, and I'm not going to get political, but I want to make a cultural comment. I actually think politics will get better as more of that generation gets in there, because I don't think they function with a baby boomer frame. That's going to be good for churches. And I think it's going to be good for the world, but it'll only be good for churches in the world if we reach them. If they're not spiritual people, then we're not going to benefit. And so, but I see a lot of potential. They're tough because they are skeptical. They're tough because in their lifetime, they've heard a little bit more negative about God and religion than they've heard positive. And it's our job. That's what I've heard on digital is to make sure, whether it's AI or it's a search on the old Google style, that they find something positive about it. And just to say that your podcast, what you're doing, just having that content out there'll be some young man who may land on it and go, I didn't even know how to think about this. And then suddenly you've got the next Apostle Paul. And I actually believe that.
Wow.
I just do.
That's amazing. Well, Russ, I feel like, in fact, I know that we could spend all day talking. So that's part of the problem. But it has been so much fun to have you on and just to kind of pick your brain a little bit about Gen Z. I know that you might not even consider yourself an expert on it, but what you have done in your life is you have built some systems. You have taken a chance. You have released control over stuff that you probably really want to control. And I believe that honestly, you're following the work of the Spirit. I mean, just thinking of how much stuff the Spirit has released control into in the world, and God's not trying to control us. Yeah. And so I love that attitude that you've put into your ministry. So just on behalf of everyone listening, I want to say thank you. Thanks for doing that and modeling it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on and the experience of talking to you. It's important for someone like me to talk to someone, I don't know in everyday life, and has a perspective that in some ways might be bigger than mine, because you're seeing a part of the world that I don't see, or you're seeing churches I don't see, but we both think the same way. And so it just builds my faith that, I am doing the right thing.
That's good. I appreciate it. And likewise, reading your book and seeing some of your stuff on deep spirituality has been really, really impactful for me. I talk about it with a lot of my friends, to be honest. I pass it around to friends. So it's been really, really cool for me too. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we hope that today's conversation was exactly what you needed to hear. If this was an important message for you today, or if you're grappling with some of the things that we talked about in this conversation today, we'd love if you just share it with social media, with your friends on social media, so that it can impact other people. And then a couple other really simple ways that you can help support No Regrets, and that you can continue to get great content like this delivered to you. One is that you can download the No Regrets app, and that'll just keep you updated with new resources and news and articles. And then you can also sign up for the No Regrets leadership email list if you visit www.noregretsmen.org. It's just a monthly leadership email that helps you take some of these ideas to the next level. And Russ's article will be on there as well. And then lastly, if you could just like and subscribe and then share this episode, put it out on social media. I love the way that Russ said that you might be actually even bringing up the next Apostle Paul. And I think about that too sometimes as I share things on social media, that the impact, even if it's just a couple guys that might hear this episode and it impacts them and it makes a difference and Jesus speaks to them, that just makes such a huge difference in our world. And so with that, we just want to say goodbye and keep leading for the cause that counts.
Thank you for joining the No Regrets Leadership Podcast. For more information and to access past recordings, please visit www.noregretsmen.org/podcast.
Life Camp USA is a nonprofit organization that mentors young men who have lost a father due to military or law enforcement service. Life Camp USA provides an all-expenses-paid, week-long, world-class camp experience that inspires, equips, and navigates these fatherless young men through some of life's toughest moments. Life Camp USA's mentors serve grieving families by helping these sons establish healthy identities, values, character, and goals without the crucial aid of a father in their life. To learn more about Life Camp's mission, visit lifecampusa.org. Again, that's lifecampusa.org.